Hi, forensics folks. Welcome back to the Humans of Forensics podcast, brought to you by the IVNVI. I'm one of your hosts, Ximena. I'm currently the IVNVI secretary, and we're also joined by Maggie, who's one of the public relations officers. We are here today with Dr. Shelby Scott. What an honor, a forensic anthropologist. Dr. Scott, for those who may not know you, could you give a brief introduction of yourself, your job, and what you teach at UofT?
Sure. Well, thank you for having me. As you mentioned, I'm Dr. Shelby Scott. I'm a forensic anthropologist and a sessional instructor here at UofT. And I hold appointments in both the Department of Anthropology as well as the Institute of Forensic Sciences. And I'm teaching courses that range from human osteology, anatomy, paleopathology, statistics, research design, professionalism, and various topics. I'm excited to be here. Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us. I know, for example, you work with the OFPS, is that right?
Yes, clarification. I don't actually work for OFPS, which is, I think, a common misconception. I actually built my own forensic anthropology consulting firm. So while the Ontario Forensic Pathology Service, or the OCC, Office of the Chief Coroner, those are the folks with whom I consult the most, but I might also be engaged by other institutions, private families, different provinces. So that could be things like exhumations or virtual assessment of bony material. But I can still give a day in the life.
That would be great. Thank you so much.
Going back, virtual assessment. So this is generally one of the first parts of any forensic anthropology consult. So a individual from, say, Prince Edward Island or Nova Scotia or Ontario would reach out, and they may have a question as to some material. Is it bone or is it not bone? Generally, that's done by photograph or some kind of maybe FaceTime or some kind of virtual assessment. If determined to be bone, then usually we would look at, is that animal or is that human? Then, of course, going to the scene if this turns out to be human. And at that point, we're looking at things such as medical legal significance. So is a bone historic? Is this archaeological, so belonging to an ancestor? Or is this a contemporary person? And if so, that opens up the door for scene recovery and lab assessment, which you might both be familiar with the biological profile. So generating, for those who don't know, generating an assessment of biological sex and age and stature. So these are some of the different things that a forensic anthropologist would do. And I would say these are the things that I'm engaged with most frequently. And that could be in so many different contexts. It could be a fire scene. I was just at a fire yesterday. It could be an aquatic scene, so somebody finding a bone in water and picking that up. Really anything. And then there's the other aspects of consultation, which would be things like an assessment of trauma, so trauma assessment, or looking at indicators of life history for identification. So these are really all the types of things that a forensic anthropologist would do, and I'd say that's usually what I'm engaged for the most.
It's really cool, yeah. So for our next question, we're wondering, what do you like the most about your job?
That's a good question. I would say I'm really driven by a sense of purpose, and I think that that's true both of the forensic anthropology space and the teaching space. So I know we focused on the forensic anthro, but the teaching is something that I'm really so passionate about. And anyone who's taken a class with me has probably heard the introduction where I talk about my playroom being a teaching space. When I was younger, my parents got me little desks, and I did quite literally used to tie my brothers to chairs, and I would make them learn. And so not that is something that I look forward to in teaching, but this sense of purpose in both. So with forensic anthropology, what I see as being the drive there is the provision of a sense of closure and resolution. And in addition to that, I would say, speaking for those who don't have a voice, speaking for the dead, and helping to answer questions like, who are these people and what happened to them? If we think of the sense of purpose more in the teaching space, seeing those light bulb moments when something, a concept clicks or something like that with a student, I I really do just live for that. It makes me happy. I go home and I talk to my fiance about it. It just really makes me excited. And having folks be excited about that work, because I've had some excellent mentors over the year, and professors as well, professors even from here at UTM when I was a student. And them being excited about the work is what got me into it. So those are the main things. And then, I guess as an aside, the fact that every day is something different. Yesterday I was driving across the province to do a fire scene, and then this morning I was having a round table in a seminar class, and after that I was doing research with my research group, and now I get to do a podcast with you lovely folks. So I've never been a 9 to 5 cubicle person. I think the everyday different is, yeah.
I was definitely going to mention the whole 9 to 5 thing. I'm not a fan of it either. I don't feel like sitting in a cubicle in an office all the time. I think that's probably, well, for me at least, that's why I'm in forensic anthro. You, Ximena, is that why?
I think as well, I definitely relate to having a passion for teaching. I completely relate to that. And I think just the sense of like justice, as you said, is closure. I think that's why a lot of folks are in forensics, for example. So I think that's a great perspective that you have provided us.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you.
Maybe you'll get into teaching.
Oh, hopefully. Speaking of things that we aspire for, what are things that future forensic anthropologists should think and consider before entering in the field that many often do not?
Another good question. I think that as an undergraduate student, speaking for myself and even as a graduate student, I had such a focus on learning practical skills, right? So how can I tell if something is bone or not bone? How can I assess biological sex? How could I do this statistic? And what I didn't pay as much attention to was the soft skills. And as I've came up and built my own consulting firm and began that consultation work, I do see more and more how important that is in the forensic anthropology space. So practically speaking, we're working at crime scenes, and it's such an interdisciplinary field, right? I mean, we've learned that, or you've learned this since you were first year undergrads and coming up. And it really is so true here. So I would say placing that emphasis on soft skills and teamwork, yes, but also leadership. And I think part of being a good leader is communication skills, organization skills, interpersonal skills, knowing when to be professional, knowing when it's appropriate to be a little bit silly with your colleagues. These types of things are what I would say are less emphasized, and in my opinion, of equal importance if you're getting out in the field and in the job space. So I think those are the things to consider. And part of this idea of soft skills is also flexibility and resiliency. The ways that we are accommodated in the university space might not always translate into the field. And a lot of our students who take our field schools here, you're smiling, this resonates, okay?
Absolutely.
So, it doesn't always work in the field. So I'll give you an example. I went to a scene yesterday and drove out there, and once I arrived, the family was on scene. I'm not stopping to take lunch. There just wasn't that space, right? So I have to be okay with that and be flexible with taking a later lunch day that day and maybe getting less sleep that night, or maybe working into the evening. So if the expectation going into this role is that it's going to be very defined and have these really strict guidelines, guidelines maybe, yes, but it's certainly not going to be as strict. And I think that that's something that a lot of folks come to term with. And I would say expecting that now is probably going to be helpful in the long run.
Thank you for that answer, Dr. Scott. I definitely think that soft skills are so important. That's why we do a lot of public speaking, but in school. But I know a lot of people kind of dismiss it as like, well, are we actually going to do it in the field? So it's good to know that it does actually matter. And I know that Maggie and I, for example, we know what it was like to be in field school. And at least speaking for myself, I definitely learned a lot just about flexibility in particular. So I think that any undergraduate students who haven't gone into field school yet are definitely going to consider that like a very defining moment in their career for sure.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And I remember one year when I was teaching or TAing field school, and a student came up to me. They were in my group, and they came up to me afterwards and they said, you know what? I always thought I wanted to get into forensic anthropology. It's not for me. And good, they realize that. That's fantastic. Now they can switch and get into something that fits them more. But that was really insightful for me as well.
I've definitely had those moments during field school where I really was thinking about it, but I really do like forensic anthropology. So don't be scared. For anyone who's going to take field school, don't be scared. So for our next question, we are wondering, have you always wanted to become a forensic anthropologist?
No, I hadn't. I tell this story to most classes when I start out, partially because it's funny, and also because I just think it's, we always think that we're born with this passion and we know what we're going to get into, and it's not so. I originally applied to school to be a kindergarten teacher. Well, to be a teacher, and I was always in the arts, like art history, so I wanted to be a kindergarten teacher. And when I turned 18, the week I turned 18, I moved to London, England, and I worked as a nanny there, an au pair. And my goal there was to really get some experience on my CV with kids, right? Working full time with kids, and also to take a gap year. I'm a big proponent of the gap year, so I wanted to do that. And when I was there, I met a girl named Tina, and her and I decided to take off, and we backpacked around Europe for 3 or 4 months together and did the Euro trip thing together. And we just got to see so much. I know folks say that if you don't know if you're going to go back to school, it's not great to take a gap year. I'm a big proponent of it. I knew that I wanted to go back to school. I knew I wanted to get my master's. It was just a matter of time. But somewhere in there, I kind of started to think, maybe I don't want to go to teachers college. Maybe I still thought maybe my master's, but maybe not for that. So I came back and I got into UofT here, UTM. And I just took all these intro classes like Ant 101, which then was 101 and 102, I think. So it was the sociocultural, and then it was the archaeology and biological anthropology. Thank you. And I really liked those classes. I was also taking, the Soc 100, Psych 100, like most of those general courses. And I really liked the archaeology and the sociocultural, any of the anthro stuff. And I was good at it. I was coming out with like 96s. And I thought, if I really like something and I don't really have to try that hard at it, then what's that old adage? If you do something you love, you'll never work a day in your life. So I kept with it. And I always say I didn't really find forensic anthropology. I think it found me. And I followed it through and fell in love and ended up here. Yeah.
It's a really cool story. It's also really cool to hear that, so for some people, it's just like they go straight into forensic anthropology, they go straight to doing work. But you had like sort of a detour, which is, I feel like it's very inspiring. People probably will enjoy hearing about this just because, once you get into first year university, most people, they have no idea what they're doing. I had no idea what I was doing. I'm pretty sure. Did you know what you're doing?
I kind of knew, but I actually didn't decide on anthropology until I took ant classes. Exactly. So I can definitely relate.
Yeah, same for me. I was split between anthro and bio for all of first year, but then I really like practical hands-on work, so I knew forensic anthropology probably was going to be the one that I enjoyed the most.
Yeah. And you know what? I think the other part of it is this idea that when you come out of university, you will know what you wanted to do. I had an idea, but I was still kind of up in the air if I wanted to get into medicine, kind of law, not as much. I knew I liked bones, but I wasn't sure if I liked the archaeological aspect. Not that I didn't like it. I liked it. I didn't know if I wanted to get into the archaeological space, bioarchaeology, or if I wanted to go medicine and do orthopedic surgery. And another gap year helped me figure that out.
Following up on your work within forensic anthropology, now that you are in this space where you seem to have accomplished a lot in your career, what is your focus in forensic anthropology?
Yeah, so I would say that my focus now, my research program, relates to epigenetic variation in the skeleton. So I focus on specific markers in the skeleton, epigenetic variants. So these are normal morphological variants of anatomy, and they may and may not be present, and they can be used for identification, or that's what my research is purporting. If I was to look at my research overall, I would say my focus is really from the lens of identification of unidentified remains. And there's so many different nuances to that, but it seems to always fall under that umbrella.
That's a fascinating focus. I think, at least for myself, it's a focus that I'm definitely looking to pursue in the future. So I'm excited to, for example, be in your Forensics 307 class of DVI.
Yes.
It's a very fascinating class. If anyone ever in the future gets a chance to take it, I would definitely recommend it. Maggie, do you have anything that you want to add for that?
I'm not in DVI personally, but I have heard very good stories about it, so I would agree. Take it if it's offered.
Excellent. Yes.
So for our next question, how did you choose your master's and PhD programs?
So I have an honors Bachelor of Science degree in biological anthropology. I then went on to get a Master of Science, Master of Applied Science, actually, from St. Mary's University, and then a PhD in forensic anthropology here at University of Toronto. My master's program I had chosen because I had been given the advice that I should expand my network. So I had done my undergrad degree here at UTM, and Dr. Tracy Rogers at the time was the forensic anthropologist here, is still here. But she was the person that I was sort of speaking with. And I knew that if I wanted to get into forensic anthropology, I would need to do a PhD. And it's good to diversify your degrees. You're getting exposure to different people, institutions, ways of engaging. There's all types of benefits. And I really had to sit down and think, do I want to be in Toronto, which is where I'm from, where my parents are, when I'm ready to settle down, or do I want to be here for my master's, which is a shorter period of time, and then leave and do my PhD elsewhere? The other consideration that I have, which I would say is arguably more important for those who are choosing programs, would be, what skills do I need? What am I going to need to hone to develop myself as a person and a professional? For a master's, I always tell students it's so important to get hands-on work with a master's program, and looking for programs that provide internship and co-op opportunities. To me, that was very important. I actually attribute that to where I got so much of my work early on in my career. So through my master's, I was able to do internships at the Nova Scotia Medical Examiner Service. That grew into a job, and it grew into some great friendships and an affiliation now. I was able to work as an intern for the Committee of Missing Persons in Cyprus. So I was doing mass grave identification there. And I was also able to do a bunch of research, right, in South Africa, in Thailand. So, and that comes with its own benefits, right? So looking for a master's program that's going to give you that hands-on experience, I would say, is of critical importance. And along that thread, for a PhD program, I always advocate for finding a PhD program that's going to allow you participation in casework, because forensic anthropology is very different than a lot of other spaces and careers, in that we need to not only have the practical side of things, but we also need to have the theory as well as the application of that into casework scenarios. So forensic anthropology has this necessity of coursework learning, research, and then also participating in casework. And if you want to get out and go into the field and be able to do casework, you have to have been on a scene before. Finding someone who can give you that is going to be important if you're hoping to go on in the field.
I was just saying that that's like really incredible advice, especially as I know some of my peers and myself are actively seeking master's programs. I think that's like really excellent advice to take into consideration. It's advice that I hadn't heard before. So I think it's useful, not to me, but for others as well. For our next question, is there anything that you would do differently regarding your career and education choices?
No, I think anything that maybe as cheesy as it sounds, I think everything that I did kind of led me to where I am now. What comes to mind might be learning more. What I mean by that is, when I was an undergrad, I would go to my classes, I'd learn, I'd do all the stuff. And it was great, but I was like mostly concerned with getting the grade at the end. And I was always thinking forward, right? Now, and I know that I'm not alone in this because I've spoken to other faculty about this. And now, as a professor, all I really want is one day where I could just sit in on a class somewhere and learn, right? Any class, something that I'm not even interested in, something outside of forensics, and just sit in on that class. And maybe I'm romanticizing education a little bit, but I really just want to get like a chai latte and just sit in a class and not have to take a test or anything and just learn. So I suppose if I could do something different, it might be appreciating where I was at the time and not rushing it, you know? If you had have told me that when I was an undergrad, I probably wouldn't appreciate it. But if we watch this back in like 4 or 5 years, maybe you guys will feel the same. You'll go, oh, okay, yeah, I get it now. I think that would be all that I could say.
That's a great answer. I don't think a lot of students will have to look back. I think a lot of students feel that way.
Yeah.
Definitely, at least for myself. It's a perspective that I'm currently like, I've actually been very recently thinking about this where I find myself very busy constantly. So it's sometimes a bit hard to like stop and actually try to enjoy what you're learning, especially because it's a career that like a lot of our peers, like and myself, really enjoy. So sometimes it's hard to like take a step back and actually learn, like you're saying. So it's a good reminder for all students that, especially if you're in a career that you're genuinely interested in, it would be great. It would be great to kind of recognize the importance and the value of education.
I do agree with not rushing and taking your time. I know a lot of people tend to want to graduate super quickly, 3-4 years, something like that. Mostly, I think it's mostly due to comparison. They see that like peers their age, they're already, some are in their master's, some are in med school, and so you kind of feel behind. But taking your time and actually appreciating what you're learning would definitely help more in the long run.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And what do they say? Comparison is the thief of joy.
Yes,
it's 100%. So true. It's so true.
That's why that's why a lot of people don't like going on LinkedIn.
Is it?
Yes. Everyone always compares themselves on LinkedIn. While it's a tool, it can be a bit of an ego blow sometimes.
Oh, for sure. And I don't think that's something that you grow out of either. No. I think that's true of anyone at any age or status.
So for our next question, as we were talking about earlier, you graduated from UofT with an HBSc in physical and biological anthropology. So are there any activities that you're involved in during your undergraduate period that you would recommend to current students?
I would say networking is a big one. Networking with your professors, and that could be as simple as attending office hours, popping by the podium after a lecture to just, give a hey, how are ya? Emailing and asking, are there any volunteer opportunities? I remember when I was doing my undergrad degree, I reached out to Dr. Tracy Rogers, and I didn't have the requirements to get into forensic science because if you remember from when we started our interview today, I wanted to go through for art and art history. So I didn't have any math. I didn't have science. I couldn't get into that program. And I emailed her and I gave her my CV and I said, I will do anything. I will sweep the floor in your lab if you will just let me get some experience. And she did not make me sweep the floor, but I did help out some of her graduate students with their dissertations and their honors theses. And that was really helpful for me just to get some experience and get a foot in the door. These types of things, right? And building your network in that way is so important. I would also say things such as societies. So we have the Forensic Science Society. These lovely folks. I was involved in the Anthropology Society. I was a treasurer at the time. Are you as well?
Yes.
Okay, good. I was involved with the Anthropology Society and I made some of my best friends there. I still, one of my girlfriends from here, she just had her 3rd child and we met here. And then I also learned a lot of skills as well, right? And I just got to be engaged in that way. So I think seeking out those types of opportunities are so important. And if you can't be engaged and you can't, run for any position in the society, then going to some of the society events and following up. I know Forensic Society, I think you have not a LinkedIn, an Instagram. So, the Forensics Society Instagram page and going to some of those events, those things really do make a difference. They really do.
I definitely agree. Yeah. And even if you can't, like Dr. Scott was saying, if you can't run for any executive positions, there's always your reps. We need volunteers for events sometimes, either with IVNVI or UTMAS. The Anthropology Society also does need volunteers sometimes. So definitely doesn't hurt to email and see if they need any help. Yeah. And as a follow-up question to that first one, So how does it feel to come back to U of T as a professor rather than a student?
It's terrible. It feels, I'm trying to find the word, proud. It feels proud, I think. I met some of my good friends at this university. I lived in OPH. I remember running around here on weekends, like playing manhunt with my friends and stuff. So, this university's always held that space for me. And as I said, this is really where I found my passion in forensic anthropology. So I feel that I owe a lot to what I gained from UTM, and being able to give that back is very satisfying. I do remember teaching FSC 100 the first time I was hired as a course instructor here, and I walked into CCT 1080, the big room, and that was where I took Psych 100. And I remember standing at the front, and I went in to test the podium when no one was there, and I took a photo, and I remember sending it to my mom. This was years back when I started teaching, and I'm like, that's where I used to sit, up there, and now I'm teaching in that same room. So it's very satisfying. It really is nice, and it's a proud feeling. I'm glad to be back.
I would definitely think it would. It's just like it's very satisfying to make it like a whole 360 from being, like a teeny tiny little first year coming back as a professor and seeing how much you've also maybe probably grown as a person too.
Yes, I'm sure that I have. I still feel like I'm 16, but yes, I'm sure I have grown. I definitely have grown for sure. So yeah, it's very nice. It's lovely. I'm really glad to be back.
I think that logic could also very much be applied to like the society involvements, as you mentioned, or networking. I know a lot of students, for example, who before they get involved, they look at people like presidents or executives or representatives, and they wish to be involved and they wish they could be in that position. And then also arriving there, it's a satisfying feeling to like feel that you're part of the community. Or for example, like you mentioned in volunteering, these are like professors and faculty that you really look up to who are so successful and so renowned, and so just even being in that position, I think that all kind of encapsulates like the undergraduate experience is so valuable for developing these opportunities and these skills. So I think that's a great outlook, and especially for someone who's come back, especially as a professor, like it's a great 360 as you put it.
It is, yeah, it is good.
For our next question, could you share ways that undergraduate students could stay informed and involved in forensics, not just in university, but just outside in the actual working in a professional manner?
Yeah, I have a few recommendations. I'll go through them. So the first thing I would say is staying up to date on literature, so journals. The ones that I find that I sort of go toward more often would be JFS, Journal of Forensic Science, because it's got a killer citation style, and Forensic Anthropology, which is a new journal, and their editorial board is just stellar. And the reason that I recommend both of those is that both of those journals place particular emphasis on the marriage between theory and practice. And as I've said, that's ever important in forensic science and forensic anthropology specifically. So staying up to date in those regards. Forensic Anthropology is great, the journal, for forensic anthropologists, but being aware of what's going on in other forensic spaces as well is just as important. So that's one. And that could be like setting a search alert, right, for different journals. Also using social media to your advantage. So we preach to be cautious with what you put online, and that is important. I've seen that go wrong, but using it to your advantage. So LinkedIn is one that I quite like, so long as you're not comparing yourself to folks. I use LinkedIn. I'm constantly, my version of doom scrolling is like searching for jobs and then reposting them, because I'm always encouraging my students to go on LinkedIn and find student-specific jobs, conferences, things like that. And I find that a lot of faculty post quite interesting things on their LinkedIn. So that's helpful to be able to, review with people and catch up with folks in the field, see what they're working on and what's going on and what you can be engaged in. There's also a Facebook. Do people use Facebook still? Oh, they do.
Sometimes, yeah, absolutely.
They do. I do. It's one of the only social medias that I have. But there's a good group on there, and it's called Bioanthropology News. And it's really great. I think a lot of the stuff there tends to be more biological anthropology, but that is related, and they do post forensic anthropology things as well. And I find volunteer opportunities, just interesting links that are sometimes cool to scroll through, job postings, all that kind of good stuff. So finding those channels and engaging with them is a great way to stay involved.
That's great advice. Absolutely. So, for our next question, anyone who's taken a class with you can definitely relate to seeing you on speaking. We all think you're a great public speaker, very professional in your demeanor. Do you have any advice for any students who may struggle a bit with public speaking skills or who just might want to improve their professionalism, especially in forensics?
Practice. 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 5 times the charm. I think that's the most important. And it is something that will get better over time. It wasn't something that came naturally to me. I think in my personal life, and I made this joke before we started, I'm a certified yapper. So one thing that I always struggled with was being concise. And it's something that I still work on today. And it's something that I am always improving on. Being concise, getting to the point, being articulate. So these are all things that I think over time can become better. And also looking in the mirror and practicing in the mirror or filming yourself, which can be very uncomfortable from personal experience, can be very uncomfortable to start with. I hate the way my voice sounds, and I really hate being filmed. I don't love having my photograph taken. And although I am speaking a lot, I don't like seeing myself on film. So, but doing that has been really helpful for me. And that was a tip that I got from one of my mentors. And focusing, there's different ways of public speaking or making your point heard. One of these, and I can't quite recall the method that it's called, but you essentially start with one point and then you give 3 points of explanation and end with a conclusion. And whenever you're speaking, giving those different points, that's something that I've always thought about. And it's helped me to kind of master being concise and getting my thoughts in order. And the power of a pause, which can feel like a long time when you're sitting, but it does give you space to think. And I always recommend a good pause.
That's really great advice for speaking. I think a lot of people will overthink the way they speak. So it's a good reminder to just sometimes go back to the basics, like practicing, and most importantly, the structure that you mentioned. Sometimes to be concise, go back to the basics that you learned of point, evidence, explanation, conclude. Mm-hmm. So I think that's great advice.
Yeah, thank you.
I definitely agree. I also did notice that with the upper year, like 3rd year, 4th year forensics courses, they are implementing a lot more presentations. So I think that's probably kind of a way to help us practice. Yeah, you guys will have a lot of presentations for anyone in 1st year. Yeah, and also congratulations on getting your PhD. It was, I think, summer 2025, right?
It was, yes, April 2025.
After statistics, or right before statistics.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, congratulations. So as you've been an expert witness before, how do you feel whenever you're in the courtroom?
I've had fantastic experience. I think it's nerve-wracking. Anything you do is nerve-wracking, right? I think this podcast can be nerve-wracking, but pushing through it is important. I've been lucky enough to have great experiences. I know that that's not always the case. Preparation, and remembering that you really are the expert. What are they examining me on? My words and my work. And I think it was Judge Judy who said that if you tell the truth, it never has to be hard, or some version of that. I can't quite remember. Essentially, the idea that if you're speaking your truth and you're speaking the truth as you know it, then you don't need to worry about memorizing or messing up, right? And so that's something that I always try to remember when it comes to speaking in the courtroom. But it doesn't get easier. It's always, there's a lot on the line when you're there, right? I'm not there for me. I'm ultimately there for the public, and that's who I serve. And so remembering that in the moment can make things a little bit intimidating. And practice, preparation, pushing through that, all good stuff.
Yeah, definitely, for sure. I know they also teach us a lot in forensics courses, or I guess, I don't know about the other ones, but I know for forensic anthro specifically, it's not that we're focusing on ourselves, we're focusing on who we're representing. So that's a very good point. I definitely agree with that one.
I second that. Yeah. Well, that brings us to the end of our podcast. Dr. Scott, do you have any final words that you might want to give to the audience?
Just thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you so much.
Thank you for coming to our podcast. Thank you for agreeing.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much for watching, everyone.
We had a really fun time listening, and we were really glad that we got to hear about like your experiences and everything. And we're really glad that we got, a bunch of advice from you, and I'm sure everyone watching will also appreciate it as well. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah. Bye.
Bye.